Piper, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I just want to say thank you to Nanrissa for connecting us. That was so cool of
She
her.
is so great.
Yeah, she was so generous with her time, and then obviously, getting us connected was super kind too. And
Yeah.
I know she doesn't generally listen to these things, but just in case, I want to tell her thank you
Yeah.
because I
Hi,
thought that was very cool of her.
Marissa.
So you are an editor, and working on Quantum Leap, and I believe you said you'd edited 4 episodes this season. Is that right?
Yeah, gosh, how many? Well, it's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, so, and then 18, so 6.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Excellent.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, and that includes me, like I have like a basic knowledge, just
Yeah.
from school and that sort of stuff. But for the uninitiated, what exactly is your job?
Okay, so I'm a picture editor because you have sound editors also, and they do another job. But
Okay.
but a picture editor, what we do is we get all the footage in as they're shooting. Like a day in the picture editor's life would be like they shoot the footage, and then we get it the next day, and then we cut the footage
Okay.
to tell the story. So we cut scene by scene. So whatever scenes they shot the day before, we cut the next day.
Wow.
And then essentially we build the whole show. We do set like temp sound editing as well, like so that essentially so that we can express the desires of the story
Hmm.
for when the real sound editors come in and do their awesome work, right? And we do temp score, we do like all the temp sound effects, so we do all that stuff too, temp VFX.
Oh, wow.
um
Okay.
so basically our job is to create the story in the vision of the showrunner, is the
Nice.
ultimate goal.
Okay. And so by taking it sort of day by day, like whatever they've shot that day, when you get to, say the end of the week, what's involved in actually, kind of putting the episode total together out of that day by day work?
So basically it's like you have your this a shoot in any television series typically is 8 to 10 days
Mm,
for per episode. That's just like for a normal, just like run of the mill, like network show. um Sometimes it's 7 days. There were episodes on this season that we had 7-day shoots.
yeah.
And so we get, depending on the schedule, you have that many days to cut, and then you might have some extra days after that. Usually you can have like, at the most, usually it's like 4 days
Okay.
um, to get the full cut ready, and then that's called the editor's cut.
Okay.
So you basically, in the editor's cut, there's different rules on the show, but generally, or depending on the show, but generally on an editor's cut, you include everything that was in the script, everything as it was shot. You're not allowed to like say, oh, we don't need that. Oh, we don't
Sure.
need that.
Okay.
So you have to include everything.
Okay.
And then that will go to the director. And then you work with 4 days with the director for 4 days.
Okay.
And then once that's done, it's the director's cut. And then it goes to the showrunner.
All right.
And then you work with the showrunner, and then it goes to the studio and the network, and they all give their notes anyway. So it's basically, it goes through several rounds of notes before you get to the final product.
Okay. Oh, that is fascinating. Because we've had the pleasure of talking with Dean Georgeris before, and Dean has told us a little bit about like kind of that part of the process, especially with like the giving notes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating to me that it does kind of go before so many eyes before you get to what we see every week.
Yeah.
About like how many like minutes or hours of footage are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, it depends, honestly. On this show, it's a lot. This show
Yeah.
it's a big show. You have a lot going on all the time in every single episode. Like even the episodes where we're like, we're gonna do like a chiller episode, and then it's still like, you know, Jen's the hologram, which is something
Right.
completely different, right?
Right.
So it's like you're always, so it always depends. I had some, and then also a lot of this stuff is shot. Some of it's shot in slow motion, like at a lower frame rate or
Okay.
a higher frame rate, and so then the footage is also converted to like real time, so you have options to
Okay.
move between, so you can get hours and hours and hours of footage if they shot it all in slow motion.
Yeah.
Like the boxing episode I did, 103, like that almost all of those, like all those boxing scenes were shot in slow motion. So I have
Wow.
just so much footage for that episode. I think that one was the most for sure. But then this one,
Wow.
you have all the fight scenes, and a lot of the fight scenes were all shot in, slow motion as well. So you have
Hmm.
moments like that too. It's a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, because I'm always curious. We see 42 minutes, right? Over an hour block of television,
Mhm.
but knowing that, yeah, there's 7 to 8 days of production generally on these episodes when they're filming. You've got to be looking at potentially like, like 70 hours worth of. Now, some of that stuff obviously they're not going to use, and some of that stuff, maybe it's not quite that much. I might be
Yeah, no, it's not
exaggerating,
that
but
much.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
but
but
yeah, but it's a lot of stuff. Now, when you get the stuff from a day's shoot, do you already have stuff that's kind of been earmarked, by the director for, oh, we want to use this, or we're thinking this and that sort of stuff, or is it really kind of just up to your eye to take, to get the best, the best takes, the best footage that you have?
So with all of that, you get paperwork. With like it's like a line script, and you get notes and stuff. So some directors will definitely be like, "This is my favorite. This is not
Mm-hmm.
my favorite," and so then the scripty will mark that in there. And so I have that available to me. Some directors don't really care to do that, to get so explicit. Some are very explicit. So it really depends on the director.
Okay.
But honestly, for television, because the director's not the end all be all, and it's the vision of like the overall show, and it's the showrunner's vision. Like I always go with what I think and know that the showrunner likes.
Mm.
Of course, there's going to be like a lot of those like special shots that directors like to get. Sometimes there's like, oh, here's the cool sweeping wide, and like, oh, here's the really cool, like in this episode, the like kind of gyroscope episode.
Yeah, that was really
Or
cool.
shot, yeah. Like, so of course, in that, I'm like, okay, I'm putting that in because I know the director wants to see that shot in the cut. Like,
Yeah.
it's just obvious that they shot it for a reason. They're gonna want to see it.
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of times I'll put that stuff in, even if like I think it might not make it to the final like cut. I'm still gonna put it in so the director can at least see it, because they're gonna ask me for it anyway.
Now, are there some directors, because it seems like on the show that there are definitely directors that, like Chris Grismer, for instance, who have directed multiple episodes, they're around, but then you have other directors that might just be kind of come in and do one episode. Are there some directors that might not necessarily stick around as long as others? And does that, and how does that work? Or is everyone pretty much there through the director's cut?
So every television show has like a producing director. Chris Grismer is our producing director on this show.
Okay.
So it's like a director who's also producer. They are in charge of multiple episodes, and they kind of are like the point person for directors. So like if somebody, they can guide the other directors to like if they have questions about like the look of the show, or if they need to have a second unit go out and shoot like pickups or something. Chris Grismer will go out and shoot that stuff so the director can shoot their stuff, so it's
Okay.
like a guide and somebody who knows the look of the show really well. And so
Mm-hmm.
most directors will only do like one episode, or they'll be asked for like back for a second season, so but the producing director will usually do multiple episodes.
Okay. Oh, okay, cool. And as far as like with this episode, with the finale, because that's someone you've worked for before, did you find the process of getting to that director's cut easier, just because you knew by the time you got to your editor's cut that it was probably going to be in line with what Chris wanted?
Yeah, and also at this point, like by the at the beginning of a season of a first season show, you're all kind of figuring out what it is, right? Like you're kind of
Sure.
discovering it. What is the look of the show? What's the feel of the show? How do we tell the story? What does an HQ scene look like versus like a
Yeah.
Ben Leap scene? Like there's kind of formulas for all of it by the
Mm-hmm.
time you get to a certain point. Like if
Sure.
I went through the season, you should have a pretty good idea of what the show is at that point. And so by the time we're at 18, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I could like cut the show in my sleep sometimes.
Well, I mean, no,
Also,
that.
but one other thing about 18 too that was really interesting is that it was like going into it, I read the script and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot. But then when I cut it, I realized it actually was pretty straightforward, because it's all of our people that we always have.
Yeah.
It's HQ. It's like we don't have any like guest actors, like it was really straightforward storytelling wise, because it's just this is quantum leap.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you say that, because one of the questions I was thinking about earlier about asking you is, because of the nature of the episode and kind of the timey-wiminess, like, I'm sure obviously that going into it, like, where stuff goes, yet because there are some scenes that are very similar to other scenes, just the nature of Ben's, like, leaping around.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a moment where you were just sort of like, wait, did I put this in the right place, or was this the scene from before? Or
Yeah, well, so usually what happens is, like, how I work and every editor works different is, like, so I cut scene by scene and I keep them in the Avid program that I use. Like, I
Mhm.
keep them separated by scenes.
Okay.
And then when I get really close to, like, maybe there's only one day of shooting left, I'll start to build it out. And then I get start to get the overall view of the episode and how it's playing,
Mhm.
right? And so at that point, then I'm looking at the script and I'm like, but I always get nervous about if I have the scenes in the right order. Cause like, just like you think you put it in the right order and then you didn't, and then it's just a mess. But yeah. I definitely had to double check this episode a few times and I was like, okay, then this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because there are definitely some moments that I think even for the viewer where you're just sort of like, okay, when am I, am I here now? Am I there now?
Yeah.
In particular, like as you get towards the finale of the finale.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like putting it all together, do you find sometimes that you'll edit a scene like you were just saying, and you'll have like the scenes together, and you'll look back and you'll think, oh, in the context of this moment, this actually works better, so maybe I should go with a different thing? Or does it usually kind of work out in such a way that the scenes just flow naturally, by the end of the week?
Yeah, usually like performance wise, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like I cut the scene how I think it's good, but then once I look at it in the context, I'm like, oh, maybe Ben doesn't need to be so upset here, or maybe
Sure.
like looking at it in the whole bigger picture of the story, like, oh, maybe his performance should be a little bit less, maybe Addison needs to be a little hotter, like it's just like that can come up for sure in that point in the process. And the other thing too is like, because this episode in particular is very intercutty, meaning you're going from like one scene and like with Ben, right? And then you go to HQ where they're watching, right? And then you go to Ben still in that same scene, and then you go to HQ still watching, right? And so like when we get those are all individual like little scenes, right?
Wow.
And so I'm cutting the little scenes, but when I don't have the scenes around it, I don't know what shot I'm coming off of from the previous scene. So I'm thinking about what shot I'm going to start on for this scene. Like if I'm ending on a close-up in the previous scene, I'm not going to want to start on a close-up in the next scene, right? So once I start building it, some of those, I'll need to change like how we get into or out of a scene. Like just because the shots, I don't know what they're shooting for some of those before I have them,
Yeah. So you mentioned that, if you end on a close-up, you don't want to start on a close-up. Can you talk a little bit about why?
It's jarring to the viewer, basically. Yeah. And sometimes you want to do that. Sometimes that's a thing that you want to do. Like in 15, we did that on purpose. When Ben is going to like do the speech at the end, the closing argument, we go from like kind of a close-up to a close-up on the other side. That was on purpose. There's times when you want to do that, and it's called like a match cut. Okay. But just as a general editing rule, it's just jarring for everyone to see that. You get confused where you are.
Right. Well, and I can only imagine that obviously when you're hopping from different like time zones, if you will, that would be really confusing, because it's like, wait a minute, especially knowing that Ben's in the project, right? It's kind of like, am I past project or present project, or
Well, and this one actually, we do have a really cool cut like that where it's Martinez. It's in the asylum, and Martinez, they start to leap when Martinez is beating up on Ben, and it's a close up of Martinez, and the leap goes off of Martinez and comes on Ben in a close-up on the bridge, and that was really cool how that ended up working out with the VFX and stuff too. That I really liked that, but that was a close-up to a close-up.
That whole fight scene, I felt like was just so well done, and was super exciting, and felt like just a wonderful kind of climactic moment that have been building to, for most of the season. I mean, at least since Salvation or Bust. And certainly we have a lot of information that's been given to us now that we know what the stakes are. But that said, like just the motion of it and the kineticism of all of that, from an editor's perspective, when you're putting that together, what's important to you in order to kind of really shape that picture of that fight?
I was really excited to get the fights. I was like, well, actually, like, I guess I should say I wasn't necessarily really excited to get them, but once I got them, I was like, whoa, this is really cool. Like, I had no idea how it was going to look, like, because at the point, I can't even think, like, I think at the point where I had the script, they hadn't even like shot the battleship stuff yet or something like that episode yet. So I had no idea what any of it was going to look like. And so when I got that stuff, I was like, whoa, this is really cool. And just like the way that they did it, and then like the lightning outside of like the asylum, it's really cool. But like, I guess when I go into cutting any fight, and the same thing with like with the boxing episode, my priority is to make it so that it looks real.
right.
Big priority is that I'm like looking. I watch all of the footage, so I like line it all up and just press play and watch it all. Okay. And then what I do, and every editor does it differently, but I take notes. So I'll say like, take blah blah blah, and then I'll say third punch. B camera. And so I'll just write down like ones that I think look cool. Yeah. And then I basically like cut the scene in my head. So I've had it half done at this point, just in my head. Then when I sit down to actually cut it into the timeline, which is, where all of the footage goes, like how we build the show is called the timeline. I'll like take all of those selects basically and put them into the timeline. And if I have two of the third punches, right, like that I like, I'll put them both there. And then depending on the punches that I liked on the other side of that, like I'll make a decision about what angle works the best.
Sure.
And also the other part of it too is learning the choreography. Like I have to sit there because it's not in a script anywhere. It's just like Ben and Martinez fight.
Yeah. right.
Well, then I'm sitting there and I'm watching and I'm like, okay, so they do two punches and then a third and then a flip and then a pull. And then like, so I'm learning every step that they have learned.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to, put that in. And then what ends up happening is I personally try to put everything in that I can. If I have to skip a punch, then I do. And then, eventually we'll end up cutting some of it out. And it's like the Martinez scene in the asylum, that scene was a little bit longer than what it ended up being, in the final, which is super common with fight scenes and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine with an episode that's just so jam packed anyway, right. Like there's like, you've got to figure out, and speaking of which, go ahead.
Sorry. One more thing. The other thing too is the beats that happen, right? Like you have a beat where like, well, that might have gotten cut. Well, there was a beat where Ben got up and Martinez like looks at him and then they start punching each other, right? Or like the beat of like when Ben lands on the ground and then he sees the blood on his fist and he takes his fist and he wipes the blood off his lip, right? Like, or the moment when like Martinez is beating up the guys and he, Ben goes, "You are the Terminator," and then he looks and then Ben goes, "Oh no." Like you have the story beats within the fights too that you have to make sure you hit as well. Besides just the like punching and
So speaking of which, and one of the big sort of story beats of that particular moment actually is the flashback to episode 3 where where the brother played by John Chafin is telling him kind of what to do with the punch. When you have moments like that, and this show, we do get flashbacks every once in a while to previous leaps. Is that literally just as simple as like pulling up the scene from the previous episode? Or do you sometimes maybe look at it from like, well, we didn't use this last time, but maybe we can use this time?
Yeah. So sometimes those moments are scripted and sometimes they're not. So this one was scripted. So we knew from the beginning. So as an editor, you have an assistant editor as well who helps. There's no way you could finish an episode just as one person.
Sure.
No way. So like when we get the script, I'm like, okay, so then my assistant will go through and find anywhere there's a flashback and pull them for me. So I already have them very easily accessible, basically. So that one we knew we were going to have, but there's like, at the beginning, like the little flash when Ian says, or when they're talking about Martinez and there's like a couple flashes to Martinez in the previous like moments that they met each other. That
Yeah.
wasn't scripted at all. That was just something that like later Martin was like, oh, let's add flashes of Martinez. That
Sure.
was my note. So then I went back and I picked what flashes to add of Martinez and how to do it.
So, okay, that's actually interesting because when it comes to doing something like that, obviously you have a scene that's already ongoing, right? Like there's a conversation happening between your characters and you're on that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this might sound like a silly question, but how do you choose exactly like when to cut away from the scene that's ongoing and insert those flashbacks?
Um, it depends on the show, right? It's like one of those like kind of unwritten rules of the show. Like, how do you do a flashback? If you pay
Mm,
attention to like how you do a flashback on Quantum Leap versus how you do a flashback on another show, it's
yeah.
going to be different because it's just the unwritten rules of the show or like
Okay.
the DNA of the show. So on this show, it's kind of just like somebody says the thing and you flash to the thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't get much more complicated than that.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, it's fascinating to me because, and this goes back to something you were saying earlier. One of the things that, because my background's in theater, and I worked as a professional actor in theater for about a decade, and that, I mean, I had a couple of experiences like here and there with some pilot stuff or whatever, but
Mhm.
that's the basis for my experience. And so oftentimes like what you do in the rehearsal room and what you do collaborating with your other actors and designers, like that's kind of where it ends. But obviously in film and television, from an actor's perspective, you do the performance, you do the different takes, you approach it differently, but there is this other huge piece of what makes the performance, and that's kind of the editor. I mean, that is the editor. Like the editor is the one that really puts that all together. So when it comes to kind of looking at those performances and taking them in, like it seems to me that especially for an editor's cut, you really do shape the performance overall. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into that?
Yeah, I will say we're very like I feel very fortunate on this show that our actors are all really fantastic.
Yeah.
So I always have great stuff to pick from, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
um actually I loved Caitlin's performance in this episode so
Mm-hmm.
much because I felt like she did such a terrific job of really getting in the headspace of multiple Addisons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when you have past Addison, that's past Addison. Like there is no residual like, future hologram Addison like in that version of that character like whatsoever. She nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was really fun because like comedic performances, those are always my favorite like to pick too because it's like you'll just watch. I mean, the rule with picking for comedy is like you watch, and if it makes you laugh out loud, that's the one. And if like
Nice.
none of them make you laugh, you bring somebody else in the room to watch the performances, and whatever one makes them laugh, that's the one you pick. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like the thing is on this show because everyone does such a really good job, like we don't actually end up like changing the performances very much from the beginning because they just nail it. Like they just really do a really great job.
Yeah.
But like I said, like the thing that can happen though is it's like, oh, if you look at the overarching story, it's like, oh wait, how would Addison be feeling about Ben at this point in this
Sure.
episode, right? Like and then you have like especially when you have like the time that she turns and she has the gun, right? It's like that like, oh, when he's trying to like get the gun away from her, like trying to like I tried to play that like it like as if he might actually convince her to not shoot, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
He shoots, right? You're kind of like, oh, he's breaking through a little bit.
Right. Right. I mean, I was surprised when she shot. I was like,
Yeah.
I was just, I mean, I thought that was a really cool moment overall. Just
Yeah,
everything
like,
about it.
Moment.
Yeah.
He's gonna break through, and you kind of see it a little bit, and then it totally doesn't even go the right direction. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it's stuff like that that's like really fun where it's like, oh, what would this person be feeling? How funny do we play things? That's always a conversation on this show in particular because there's a lot of comedy on this show.
Yeah.
And like really cute little the date scene is that was one of my favorites actually. That was really fun.
Yeah. Are there times when you're looking at the footage and like you have these little variations like oh, they seem really happy here, oh, they're not quite as happy in this take or whatever. Are there times that things like just immediately stand out to you and it's like, well, I have to use this, and you might shape the rest of it around that moment?
Yeah, I think like with that date scene, there were things that I really liked because they ad-libbed a lot of that.
Okay.
Or like they did like variations of a lot of that,
Yeah.
or Caitlin's performance of like, well, we haven't even had dessert yet, like that was always different. But I always go for the one that makes me laugh, and usually it ends up working out, working
Yeah.
itself out, and the same thing with like the Mongolian beef, and like all of Raymond's performances were
Yeah.
all different, very different. And I just like to go with my gut for that stuff. But there have been times too where it's like, oh, I really liked this performance when I watched the dailies, but then as I'm cutting the scene, like actually putting it together, I realized, oh, that scene where like Ben's crying, it's too much. It's too like, there was a scene in 9 in particular that I can think of where they're in the alleyway, and they almost get hit by, well, before they get hit by the car.
Oh yeah.
Before the car comes after them in the alleyway, and they have like the moment where he's talking to her, but to Carly, but actually Addison.
Yep. Yeah, I love that.
Like there were variations of Raymond's performances in there where I was like, I'm going to use this one, and then I went to do it, and I was like, it's too much, and they like had to pull it back. So sometimes it's just in the context of the scene itself. Even it's just like, yeah, that's not the right choice, and you figure it out as you go.
So do you think that that's a lesson to all actors, aspiring or otherwise, listening to this right now, that it is so important to be bold with your choices, obviously, but also to change it up, to explore as much as you can, as opposed to locking yourself into one thing? Yeah,
it's so interesting because there's some people that are like, variation, give me all the variation. And then some people are like, no, you want to keep it like, like make sure you like get it, and honestly, like, it's always good, like, okay, so again, speaking to the comedy on the show, is it's like they'll do comedic, but they'll usually also give like a really straight one too. So we always have like the option to do the really goofy one, or the middle one, or the like pretty straight one, right? And and also with the emotional scenes too, it's like usually there's like a little bit emotional, really emotional, and like crying, and so like we usually have variations like that. Those are always, I personally think it's always good to have those to choose from. But also, you're on a network show, you're up against really tight deadlines, and you don't have a lot of time. So sometimes you get one take, and that is what you get.
Sure. Well, yeah, and it's funny because that's something that, producers that we've spoken with have mentioned before about, that there have been episodes where they had this idea that, of what something might look like, especially when it comes to some of those big, like, establishing shots or whatever, like Salvation or Bust. And then when it gets time to actually look at the footage, it's like, we don't really actually have that. So we've got to make do with what we do have. Yeah. When it comes to stuff like that, and like trying to make things look big, especially being a network show, and there are times across the course of this season where, I mean, things have looked just epic, compared to a lot of other TV shows out there. Yeah. How much of that does fall on your shoulders, and working with what you have, as opposed to, the directors and the DPs going out there and actually capturing that and then, giving it to you?
Okay, well, so usually those big shots are planned out ahead of time, but okay, so a couple of like the actual like big shots in the boxing episode, you have, like the little ring. There's a couple shots where the ring is so tiny, and you have this wide shot with the giant crowd and all that, right? Like, the ring was actually like real size. We just shrunk it down and VFX the rest of that in, wow. But it was always known from the beginning, it was budgeted in VFX that we're going to have 2 shots, where we're going to do the giant stadium crowd, right? And so then I talk with, like, we have our VFX people and discuss, okay, you have 2 shots in the budget. So I'm like, great, I can do that twice. So when I'm cutting the scene, I know that I can do 2 of those shots, and I'm going to pick the best places where I think they're going to work. Right. Okay. So that, that's how that, that one in particular worked. And on this show, on this episode, the accelerator room. Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the accelerator room. So that too was like, how many shots do we get? Like, oh, let's make them look smaller, and the room look bigger. There's this show uses a lot of magic.
And we're not talking about Ernie Hudson's character. No, that is really cool though, because I feel like that, again, the show has been incredibly successful at making those, making some of those moments stand out. And especially the finale, mentioning the accelerator room. I'm glad you did, because that moment is I mean, it's so grand. It's, it's this sci-fi epic quality of something that you would, I mean, honestly, yes, they can do amazing things today, but let's face it, 20 or 30 years ago, that's a big screen moment. That's a movie moment. That's not a TV moment,
Yeah, you're right.
certainly not looking like it did, on our screens for this. One of the things that obviously the show does, which the classic series did as well, although I would maybe argue not quite as well as the new series, but technology and time helped that, is use footage from other sources, and like in SOS, for instance, a lot of that came from Battleship. So when it comes time to integrate that footage, what are you looking for, and how much of that is sort of planned out ahead of time to where they know exactly, like, we want to use this, and then you build around it? Or is it a case of literally going to the source material and finding those moments and then inserting them?
I am pretty sure I wasn't the editor on that episode, but I'm pretty sure that's what they did. So they were like, okay, we're going to use Battleship. Here's moments we can use, and this is how many minutes you can use, right? Because they have to make a deal for, like how much they can actually use. So that all goes into it too. It's all, it all comes down to money all the time. So
right.
That's right. Like, this is how much we have budgeted. So I'm pretty sure, I mean, if it was my episode, that's what I think I would be doing. I would be going through the thing and be, or maybe even our post crew, like our post coordinator or post supervisor or something, went through and found, the moments that they could use and then pass those to the editors. The editor didn't have to go through the entire movie.
Sure.
And a lot of times there are people that help with stock footage in general, and that's how it works. So like if I need like, a wide of like, when they went to Martinez's house in, was that 6? Yeah, and
so, yeah.
we needed an aerial or something, and I'm like, oh, I need an aerial of a place daytime that looks like this city, and then some people will go and like the post PA and the coordinator, they'll go find a bunch of shots and then feed them to us, and we'll look at them and pick one and put it in, and then if it's approved, it's approved. If not, then we have to find something else. That happens all the time. But yeah, with like the Battleship stuff, like I'm sure that was exactly how they did it too, but I don't know for sure on that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me too, because the way that it does feel so seamless. And I know, I mean, I use that as an example just because they're pretty big scenes, but it felt very, very seamless.
Yeah. Well, and that one, I know on that episode too, like there's the cool shot where you're coming in on the ship and the things are going off and and it's like they were on the ocean, the open ocean or whatever. Like that was like parked,
right.
on the bay, and they like did all of that in VFX, and it's like I've seen the original shot and then what it turned into, and I was like blown away.
That's so cool. When you by the time you see it with the VFX, is that, I mean, are you seeing it that way by the time it airs basically, or do you see it before that?
It depends on the show. And it depends on because every TV show has a different workflow with VFX, in the sense that most of the times the editors will get input into how the VFX looks. So if we get something and then I'm like, oh, I don't really, can it swirl more or something like that, give the note, and then they'll, do another version and send it back. On this show, we are on such a tight deadline all the time, and our shows are so huge. A lot of times there's not time for the editors to look at them and get a pass, and they just go straight to the showrunner, because he just he knows what he wants. It's a lot more time efficient on this show to do it that way.
Now, once it does get before the showrunner, if there are any notes, if there is anything that needs changing, does it go back to you to do that changing, or does somebody else do that?
Yeah, actually, okay, so on this episode in particular, because we had the accelerator room, which was like all CG, like that was a really big VFX moment, and it was so core to the show, we had to really get the look right for that. So we started temping that even before the editor's cut was done. That was one of the first scenes I cut. Like as soon as I got that scene, I cut it.
Okay.
And then we sent that scene by itself through Chris Grismer. He got to do a round of notes with me on that. And then we sent it to Martin. And this was before I even had the whole episode, shot. At that point, because it was so much work was going to have to be done on that we just had to get it to the VFX people as soon as possible. So we worked on cutting that scene, and then, yada yada, we finished the episode, we lock the episode, and then, then Martin calls me and he says, actually, I don't like this one shot. Can you come? Because in VFX, it just wasn't working how we all wanted it to. So it was like, let's
Mm.
just change it. So I think the phone call was literally like, just figure out a way, and then I'll look at it. I'm like, okay, great. So then I like came up with a couple options on like how we could get rid of that shot and do a different thing. And then, got on with him and like showed him 3 different options, picked the best one, and then sent that off. So it's like, and that was after we were locked.
Yeah, man, that's incredible.
Yeah.
How much time? Because I know that obviously, you usually have a degree of lead time before the episode is going to air. But how much time generally is there from the time you lock an episode to the time that it airs? And I know it's different. I know it's not the same for everything.
On this show, it's different because like we have COVID. There's like tons of stuff going on this show, and you have like you have so much going on. I think actually like I locked 18 in like early March.
Okay.
Yeah, like it was like the second week of March, according to my calendar, was when I locked it. And so they had a couple weeks, but that was also one where we wanted to get it because it was such a big VFX episode. Yeah. We wanted to get it done like as soon as we possibly could, to give VFX time to work on it. But it just depends on the episode. It's usually a few weeks though.
Okay. You mentioned earlier the ad-libbing, and that's something that, we kind of were made aware of fairly early on, with some of the ad-libbing that happened on the show, which is awesome, exciting, and a little bit surprising because I didn't necessarily know if that would be the case on a show like this. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you see the script, you read the script. When you get those ad libs in, how much of an impact does that have on the way that you cut something together, especially based off of any preparation you might have had before you get into the actual work?
Well, like, okay, the date scene, mm-hmm. that the ad lib at the end actually was Raymond's egg rolls to Caitlin, like how we end the scene, like the little button.
Yeah.
That was not in the original scene at all whatsoever. And actually it was interesting because like, as I'm cutting the scene, I was like, it didn't have like a good clear out for the scene. Like it was just like, there just wasn't a good clear out. And then there was the ad lib, and I'm like, thank God. Like that's perfect, It's such a cool little moment between the two of them, And so it's like that, that dictated how the scene was going to end because I didn't really know what I was going to do besides that. And it's really great. I love it. But there's like, and it's the same with like, Mason's ad lib. Mason is definitely the person who ad libs the most, for sure. And they are so good. Like I think it's in 7, right? Like the Meowgency.
Yep.
I think that was an ad lib. I'm not positive on that, but I think it was.
Yeah, I think that's what we had been told. I think.
Yeah, because I watched the dailies for that scene, and yeah, I remember that it was like everyone just like lost it. But yeah, no, there's a lot of really good Mason's really good at the ad libs. Yeah. I think now I'm blanking on who it was that told us this, but I think for the previous episode, there's the moment where they're in the cockpit with Raymond and Ben, and apparently some of that was also ad libbing as well. Yeah, I'm sure. Raymond ad libs a lot too. Yeah, it's not, and it's not like some shows are just like almost completely ad lib. Like it's not to that extent, but it's just like every once in a while they'll throw a little something in there, and most of the time it actually works really well, and it makes it at least in my episodes it usually makes it into the cut.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the things, and this is a sense that we've gotten in the conversations that we've been fortunate enough to have with people working on the show, mm-hmm. and I could be completely wrong, and so feel free to dispel this with your other experiences, but it seems like the collaborative spirit on this show might be a little notch above what it is on other shows. And to the fact that, like, Nanrissa, for instance, the whole reason that she connected us is because she said that she had kind of wanted to see what you were doing and wanted to be, involved, especially with her being the hologram and stuff. What impact has that sense of collaboration had on you? And do you think that is the case, that the show does seem a little bit more collaborative than others you've worked on?
It is really cool. The thing that is different on this show than any show that I have personally done is that, like, we have offices at Universal, but our offices are in with production. Usually post is like put off in some like office away from everyone and everything all the time because nobody cares about us, and we get forgotten about, and that is what it is, and we're just used to it. But like my office is right next to costumes, you know,
Oh,
which is
wow.
like right next to production design. Actually, there's a, like, I think one of the production designers is like right across this hall from me, you know, and it's like, getting to see like other and meet other departments
Mm-hmm.
is really, really fun. And like,
Yeah.
and you just have this like true sense of like collaboration and camaraderie that maybe exists on production all the time, but since I'm in post, I never get to have that. You know, it's
Yeah.
like post is, you know, camaraderie, but not, you know, with production. So that's really cool. And then the other thing too is our office is right across from our stages where we shoot, like where HQ is and everything. So like
Nice.
I get to go to set, like if I want to, whenever I want to. I can just like mosey
Ah,
on over there and like watch what they're shooting and look at the footage, which has been great. Like on my episodes, to go up there and like sit there and get to watch what they're shooting. And
mm,
that's how I met Nanrissa, actually, is I went up during 15, you
mm-hmm.
know, and got to talk to everybody up there, you know. And it's like this really cool sense of like, the other thing is I think everybody really likes making this show. It's a
Yeah.
really fun show to make.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. And so it's like that, and just having a really good vibe, you know, of making something that everybody really likes is
Yes.
is definitely like huge.
Ah, that's so cool. I mean, it's so nice to hear because it reaffirms sort of what we already sort of held to be true, and certainly with the experiences we've had so far with everyone. I mean, everyone's just been so lovely. Whether you know, obviously yourself or Dean or Drew or of course Caitlin and Rissa, and you know, we've just been so lucky. I think to see that aspect, because sometimes it's very easy to, you know, have that kind of, for lack of a better word, worship of the thing, right? You watch the show and you're just
Yeah.
so into it, and it's like, I'm a fan, and you love it. But when you also get the opportunity, and that's one of the things that we hope we're able to do, is also share with the rest of the fandom, that hey, you know, here are the people that make this show, and this is, you know, everybody is happy to be making this show and excited. And
Yeah, and it's fun too, like in the dailies, like you can tell, because you know, we see everything from between action, you know, like,
mm-hmm.
you know, and so like you can tell when it's a really good day on set,
Yeah.
you know, and you can tell when it's not such a good day on set. But honestly, like on this show, like that like never happens.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Like everybody loves each other. They're always like goofing off and like having so much fun, and it's really cool to see. Yeah, and it's not on every show. It's really cool.
Yeah. So speaking of having fun, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. What are the bloopers like?
They're so good. Oh my god. Yeah, no, they're funny. Like, I mean, it's a lot of it's, you know, just like I said, like people flubbing lines and, you know,
Sure.
people goofing off or taking something like too far in a scene, which is really funny. Like if somebody messes up and then they just keep going with it.
Yeah.
You know, people giving each other hard times, you know. We haven't had a lot of like anybody like falling, like nothing like physical necessarily. I just had one recently where somebody walked into a door. They tried to
Oh
open
no.
the door and it was a pull instead of whatever, but they ran into the door.
Oh no. You know, our genuine hope is, I know that I'm not alone in expressing this, is that there is some sort of, you know, physical format release of the show, and that some of that stuff gets included,
Oh, that
because
would be cool.
we you know, as fans, we would love to see some of that stuff, and especially knowing that some of these episodes, oh, here's something else that I wanted to ask you, I almost forgot. When you do an editor's cut, and you're saying like it's the whole script, knowing that it's got to be 42 minutes, what's the longest you've ever like done an editor's cut at before?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so this episode was actually not super long, which
Mm.
because it was so straightforward and it's so like just go 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 all the time. There
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a lot of fat to cut from it, honestly.
Yeah.
15 I think was the longest, maybe. I know that there's been an episode that's been like usually 12 minutes over, I think has been like,
Okay.
it's been, yeah. And like, I mean, I know like for 15, I think I had to cut the most out of that than any episode. I think I cut like, you know, whole scenes and like halves of scenes out of 15. There was a lot in 15.
Wow.
But yeah, I think like the pilot was maybe 12 minutes over at
Okay.
least. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it would be. And that's one of the things too, because people are hopeful for a physical release, is that I think that some of that stuff like deleted scenes or extended versions of the episode would be great to see. And even if they just, did that on Peacock. And it's an interesting thing because I think, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but when we've spoken with Dean before specifically, he mentioned the fact that in, a lot of times he feels like that extra stuff doesn't necessarily add to the episode. Like, he always hopes that what you see on the air is the best version of the episode. But I'm curious from your perspective, do you agree with that? Or do you think that there are times when, if we would have had those 5 extra minutes, that would have been really great?
No, I mean, I don't think so. Because a lot of the stuff, it gets cut because you can cut it. Like, there's nothing, like, you don't necessarily really need it. Like, the stuff in 15 that we cut, a lot of it was just stuff that already, like, you get it from another part of the episode, right?
Yeah.
Like, there was a scene in 15 where it was like a whole explanation of like why Jen hates courtrooms and like, but it's like you get that from the other conversation that she has with Ben, before they're like walking, when they walk out of the first, I can't think of like what the scene is exactly, but when she mentions, a public defender only gets this many minutes with their client, like you get that in other places, right? And a lot of the stuff that we cut, it's always jokes. It's always jokes. Like there was a bit in that episode too where it's the scene where it's like Addison and Ian, they're like, oh, we got something that can help Ben or something, and they're like they're talking about the knife, or no, the gun, when they discover where the gun was. Before that happens, there was like a whole bit where they're sitting there and Addison talks about, I'm like so frustrated that I can't be in there. And like, she has a pen and there's like a gag with like, you look like you're going to stab me with a pen. And like, it's just like a cute little moment, but it's like, it's not necessary.
Yeah. Well, I think that again, going back to the actors on the show, the nice thing is that so much of that kind of playfulness comes across throughout the course of the performance anyway. So like you said, it's not something that's essential to telling the story. And I think exactly. It's so fascinating because I sometimes I'll read comments about the pace of the show and about how, people wish that there was a little extra time or that sort of thing. But I for me, more often than not, I walk away from an episode feeling, very, very fulfilled. Like it's definitely, had the right effect on me because the story that's being told is told in a way that has that speed, that lacks, kind of that fat, and the emotional core of it is always there. And I think the wonderful thing about the show is it's not afraid to ask questions of the audience, and to have kind of that ability to say, hey, we might not give you everything, but we're definitely going to give you enough. And I'd be curious, from your perspective, and especially as it pertains to your work, when you get some of these scripts or when you get that footage, is that kind of what you're going for? Is the opportunity to just say like, I don't have to give you everything. I don't have to give you all the answers. I just have to give you enough.
Yeah. It's like, well, for me, because I can't, I don't write the show, so I can't like technically cut things out of it or make those kinds of that caliber of decision on this show. But like, it is definitely like, we earn our pauses on this show. Like everything is the DNA of this show. Every show is different. The DNA of this show is go, 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 go. Wait. Okay, go, 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 go.
Sure.
Like you have the moments, and we do pause, and we do have those emotional moments and those emotional beats on this show, and they're earned. It's absolutely. Not if we made every emotion, like every scene, you could do that, but it's just not this show. Like 18, you have like some really nice moments with Ben and Addison, and they might not be super slow, but they are emotional. Absolutely.
Well, it's the same thing with Ben and Ian, at the top of the episode. Like,
that too.
Yeah. And here's, I certainly want to wrap things up. Don't want to take too much of your time, but one of the scenes that was so effective for me and really, I mean, just emotionally hit me is the scene where you have the 3 Ians from across the time period.
We call them the 3 Ians.
Nice. I was wondering. Now we have a term.
It's the 3 Ians.
But with the 3 Ians, there's like this. I don't know. There's something about the way that it matches up, and in particular with future Ian, there's something, especially about Mason's performance there. the weight of it just lands, and how
Mhm.
incredibly important that moment is, both for past and present Ian, and especially for future Ian, because in my mind, the meaning behind all of this is that future Ian will no longer exist.
Yeah, right.
They're
Mhm.
literally sacrificing themselves, for the greater good, and it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful moment. So when you have to put something like that together, how does that work?
So that's a really good question, because usually in a script, a script is just the lines. It won't give direction. It won't give like cut here or cut to black. It doesn't do that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. That was scripted though, and that's very rare. So it
Mm.
was literally like three-way cut of Ian's
Yeah.
saying this line together. And so we knew from the beginning, like, but that's what it was. So I was like, oh, well, what is that going to look like? I guess we could just literally do a three-way cut and just go as like simple as it's scripted, right? And so like putting that together, but then like figuring out like, oh, let's have them, like come in from the sides, and then we'll go to the shots of their hands hitting the buttons, right? And like that was all, and the other part of it too is like Chris Grismer and his awesome shooting. He shoots like so clearly, where it's like I clearly see this shot is for that, this shot is for that, this shot is for,
Mm.
like, I can read. My goal is to be able to look at his footage and be like, this is what he wants,
Yeah.
or this is why he shot it this way, and this is what he was envisioning. And so that he got the close up of the hands hitting the button, well, we should see that, right? And
Yeah.
so figuring that out was actually a discussion with me and the one of the VFX people, and was like, okay, this is what I kind of want. Can you like temp it so we can get a good look for it? And so then they did that version, and then it went through like only like maybe a couple iterations, and then we had the look of it.
Wow.
And then also you have the moment right after that where I interpret it as this is when future Ian goes away,
Mm-hmm.
when the camera comes up above and they look up,
Mm-hmm.
and that shot right after that, so it was like it was pretty clearly laid out, which was good, and pretty clearly scripted and clearly shot. But it was just figuring out, what does that actually look like? The other part of it too is like also the DP, like figuring out like present is blue, the color
Mm-hmm.
temperatures throughout the episode. Present is blue, and the past is golden, and then the future is stark. And that
Yeah.
was talked about from before they even started shooting, that was going to be what the looks were going to be for that episode.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was fascinating about, and I think it was a little bit more noticeable due to the different time periods,
Mm-hmm.
is the way that the lighting and the color palette,
Mm-hmm.
works to tell that story. Are there times as an editor when you see stuff that it might be a great take or it might be a great shot, but there's something with the lighting or there's something a little off here, and it's just like, I can't use this?
Yeah, there's not on this show necessarily there, but there's always like there might be a shot where like, oh, the light accidentally goes out in the middle of it, and then you can't even
Sure.
use that one,
Yeah.
and but a lot of times I try really hard to just cut for performance. Even
Mm.
if even when it comes to like size of shots and things like that, like honestly, if somebody's performance is so phenomenal, but it's so phenomenal in a wide, and technically like when you have like a really emotional scene, you should be in a close up. Like that's just like kind of a general rule, right? But if their
Sure.
performance is just killer in the wide, you will be so dialed into their awesome performance, you're not even paying attention to what size the shot is. That's
Yeah.
my philosophy with how I cut things. So I try to always cut for performance, and if there's like some weird thing with like the color temperature was wrong in that take, and then they got
Hmm.
it figured out after that, or some setting in the camera was wrong, I usually use that anyway, and they can usually get it fixed in color correction and the online process or VFX later.
Okay.
Another good example would be like we do a lot of handheld,
Yeah.
and it can get really like too shaky sometimes, right? and
Sure.
so and so like some of it is like, oh, that's such a good performance, and I'll put it in for the performance, but then sometimes they're like, we cannot do the shake, you have to switch it out. So then I'll switch it out. Now I'm like, I'm gonna pick the performance I want
Yeah.
first, and then I'll make them tell me to change it.
So, speaking of, to me, one of the early kind of iconic moments of the show is the moment in episode 3, and Somebody Up There Likes Ben, when Ben has the little monologue to his brother
Mm-hmm.
in the jail cell.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was like, it was kind of like, oh, here we go. Like this,
Mm-hmm.
if this is going to set the tone, like this is the
Yeah.
show. And I'm curious as to, did you know right away? Like, did you just know it's like, this is the one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and usually that's the thing, is like, that's part of an editor's job, and of being a good editor, and the thing that you want to strive for is that you just have a good instinct. Like, you need to, and some people just have it. It's something that you also need to learn. I think that you can learn it. I think it's easier for some people than others.
Sure.
But like, that's definitely like a thing where it's like, yeah, you watch it and you're like, yeah, this is definitely like, and actually that scene for me also, I was the same way, where I was like, here we go.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is, honestly, I think everybody felt that way about that scene. Like, as it went through all the, it was just like everybody's reaction to that scene was the same. Was like, this is it. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up, but before we do, just because I think, unfortunately, and I've been so excited and so thrilled to speak with you, and I'm so grateful that you showed up, and not that you showed up, not that there was any question necessarily, but I'm glad you're here, is what I'm trying to say. But because, unfortunately, editors' names do not often get the notice that they should, or the the attention that they so richly deserve, who are some of the editors to you that, like, if you know their name is on something, you know that it's going to be good work? Who are some of the people that maybe you've worked with, or even are currently working with?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some names.
Well, let me tell you the names of the editors on this show.
Please do.
They're great. Ian Mayberry and Christina Castro and Ben Baumgartner. They're all on this show. Those are the editors for the first season, and they are fantastic and so much fun to work with. And like, honestly, like, there's just so many editors. Like, so hard. And like, I mean, I have like a lot of people. Fortunately for me, like, I have mentors. The way that the post-production community really works is that, or I guess not always, but post people are very, they're very nurturing, and like I said, you have an assistant editor, and like, part of my job is to teach my assistant how to do my job.
Sure, absolutely.
so that is like a huge part of my job. Yeah. And so, like, that's the thing, is like, there are so many editors in my life that I've been fortunate enough, when I was an assistant, coming up, that I was able to learn from, and and gain knowledge from, and then I can do my job, and so, like, there's just that's like a huge thing within the post community, is just like learning from other people, and you're constantly learning in this job, because you're just constantly getting better all the time.
I love that. I mean, I firmly believe that when it comes to art, and I mean, I think this goes for everything, to be honest, but I think that it's so true of art, is that you really, you don't learn it from a book, you do learn it from the people. And I think that that's one of the things that I love so much about it. I know that I've had people in my life that have had a huge impact on the way that, the way that I work, on the way that I live, right. on just who I am as a person.
Well, well, and the other thing that people, like, one little more note about editing too, that people don't realize, and maybe now people will now after listening to this, but it's like, it is an art. It's a lot of times we get put with like technical categories, in award shows and stuff like that, but it is an art. It is like the part of the storytelling process, like you said, like, I'm picking the takes, I'm picking what to show when, and what kind of music to play, and and the impact that has on how a viewer sees the story, and how a viewer like, oh, this is how I want the viewer to feel, so this is how I'm gonna show that. Right. Is huge, and people don't always realize that about editing, that it is, like you said, it is an art, and it is part of the storytelling process, and it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, there's such an impact, such a huge impact that you have, obviously, on the performance, like you're saying,
Hmm.
on the pace of the show, on what's
Hmm.
important. Where do you want the people's eye to go? Because there's only so much that, like, cinematography and a director can accomplish with that. They can certainly give you like the
Yeah,
guide, right? But
yeah,
ultimately, it is your choice, and I just think that
yeah.
that is incredibly amazing, and it's so important. And I have said this, based off of my very meager, basic knowledge of what editing is. I've said this. I've said this for a long time now. I firmly believe that this is just an incredibly well edited show, and there have been moments throughout the course of the season that have stood out to me in such a way that's just like, wow, like the way that this works, the way that it all fits together is so impressive to me. And so I think that you and the rest of the team have done such a wonderful job. And
Thank
um
you. I hope that this like helped, like understanding of it too.
for sure. I mean, it definitely did with me, and I certainly have more questions, and I hope we get the chance to get to those some other time.
Yeah.
I know that you really can't say anything at all, but I just want to leave it here. How excited are you for the second season?
Oh, I'm so excited. I am currently working on it,
Nice.
and it's
Which,
really fun.
which episode? Can you tell us which episode?
3.
Three. Okay, nice.
Yeah, we're
Excellent.
staying like in the same so editors do every third episode, and we're staying basically.
Mm,
Well, the rotation did get messed up a little, like it got switched around a little bit because we went right into it.
yeah,
So like since I did 18, there's no way I could have done 1 or 2.
right.
I have to do a
Sure.
third one again, but it's great.
Nice. Excellent. Well, we're so looking forward to it. And I just, again, I can't thank you enough for being here. This has been such a cool conversation and so different. That's one of the things that we always want to try to do is just shed light on the people that are working on this show because we love it so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We love that you guys are so excited about it. Like the fandom's half the fun.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Piper Kroeze, thank you for being here. And again, I
Thank
really
you.
hope we get the chance to do this again sometime.
Yep, thank you so much.
Absolutely.